Hello there, sword friends. Today we are revisiting a sword that I have reviewed already, the Shadow Dancer Hira Zukuri S5 Katana. And below here on the bottom rack, we have the example sent to me from Shadow Dancer directly that I reviewed. I'll link that review in the description down below. Above, we have the same katana, but a variant that was sold on Amazon. And this video is going to feature the discrepancies between the two swords, and I'm going to be able to show you some of the consistency that Shadow Dancer has in their wares. So if you find one in the wild or are buying them from different locations, you might have some idea of what to expect in comparison to the reviews that I've made. Measurements are listed in the description down below. And I'm also going to break the one on the top. This was sent to me. I want to note some disclaimers here. This was sent to me specifically for the purposes of breaking. So if for those of you that like to see me break stuff, well, you're in for a treat. Those of you that despise seeing me break nice things, I'm sorry, this is going to disappoint you. But do know that this was specifically sent to me to push to failure. That's why it's made the journey to me, is for my particular skill at breaking things. Sword friends, additional quick note here. Tariffs are weird right now, which means I can't tell you how much reliably this is going to cost you depending on when you watch this video. So if you watch it and the prices are different, then do bear in mind that that changes my perception of how good a value this sword is. If they're still reasonably accurate, then it should be about the same. Either way, the video is going to contain bits and bobs about build quality and all that. It should still be useful, but in terms of pricing and how it stacks up against things on the market's in a really weird place right now, so that could change. But anyway, on with the video. Sword friends, I'm known for somewhat pedantic and unnecessary disclaimers, and this one's going to be longer. I'm sorry, but it does have some more information in it than usual, and it's important for transparency's sake. So the normal stuff, it's a review sample. If you think that makes me biased, you know at the start. I'm also not an expert. Keep that in mind as you hear my thoughts throughout the course of this video. But the person that owned this sword before me was a private sword citizen. They sent it to me, but that person had received a exchange sword or some kind of sword in exchange for this from John, the owner of RVA Katana, who wanted me to push this to failure, and then he was going to send it out to a lab or something. That plan has changed a little bit. I'll elaborate in just a second. But the basic gist is that John, a competitor to Shadow Dancer, was involved in prompting this to be tested by me. Now, on personal inspection, I've seen the receipts as I mentioned, but on personal inspection, it looks exactly like a Shadow Dancer Hira Zukuri S5 Katana, and it doesn't look like it was manipulated, damaged, or diminished in any way, at least not that I can tell. And if you've watched the hundreds of videos I've made, I'm not an expert, but I do have a reasonably keen eye for differences and problems. So I don't see any of that. I have no reason to speculate that it is not as described. So it seems like a valid candidate to do this review on. You're going to see me compare this to the other S5 Katana that Shadow Dancer sent me directly throughout this video, and then I will test this and to failure, and it'll end up looking like this. But anyway, the point was that since John was involved, it's important I disclosed that too, but also either plans changed or I didn't understand them from the start. I am going to now send this to a lab in Wisconsin who is going to do chemical testing on it along with two other samples. I will talk about these other samples from a different company, which are also S5 and S7, and we will see what they are made of. That's in a different video, but I will disclose what this one is made out of in this video, and maybe they'll hop on a video call or something if they're comfortable getting on camera once I have the results. I will tell you, I haven't sent them off yet, but the basic gist is I am going to send this to a lab in Wisconsin. We'll do chemical and hardness testing. They're a metallurgical lab, and they do it professionally, and I will share the results with you. The cost on that is roughly $700. John at RVA Katana is going to be reimbursing me for the cost of the thing, but I am going to pay my own money to the lab to do it. I will be reimbursed, so I am the customer of the lab. And the chain of custody is I got the sword, I broke them, and now I am sending them to a lab, and that includes these. I have the video of me breaking all of these swords. So anyway, that is the context for you to know. There we go. That's enough babbling. On with the video. There are some things I can call out right away. When I got the sword, there was a more or less what amounted to a broken Makugi peg, the peg that goes through the middle. Initially, I was a little off-put because I saw about a 1/4 inch gap, or 1/8 of an inch gap is probably more apt, between the tsuba and the habaki, but this area above the guard, or around the cross guard area, around the tsuba area, had a lot of play in it. And I wasn't quite sure what had happened. The original person that sent this to me, which is incidentally not John from RVA Katana, private sword citizen. Anyway, the person that sent it over my way had noted that there wasn't any problem when he sent it to me. It was whole, it was tight, it was in good shape. It was a good example that there weren't any issues to note about the sword. More or less what seems to have happened is the post office has jostled it around. It caused the Makugi to break, and I will replace the Makugi. I'm glad that I have made the swords naked before doing anything, because that could have turned into a helicopter of doom. So I've disassembled the swords. I've looked at all the pieces, components, and I do see some differences here, but the main thing that I can call out was the Mikugi was broken here. I will replace the Mikugi. That will be the only thing that wasn't as it was sent to me, I suppose, because it's a safety issue. I don't want it to turn into a helicopter of doom. If I play with a broken Mikugi, it could certainly do that. I don't think that the Mikugi was bad or anything. It looks like it was just an issue of post office related shenanigans. The rest of the sword looks okay. So I'll dispense with the rest of the nonsense and kind of go over some of the differences. Now I'm going to start with the blade. Usually I go soup to nuts, top to bottom. Today I'm going nuts to soup, bottom to top, I guess. I'm going to start with the blade is the point, and I'm going to start with the Nakago area over here. Now on either one of these, I do see a difference between the Nakago. The example from Amazon has more tool markings on it, and it's got a little bit more janky a shape. It's worth calling out that neither one of these are refined in comparison to Nihonto, or like the Japanese swords they're trying to emulate that cost significantly more money. But both of them are better than average when it comes to reproduction swords in the price market. They're not full of rust or jank or yuckiness. There's no burrs on them. They've been refined and addressed, but they don't have a lot of file markings or really attention to detail here. And I want to call out that most people never disassemble the sword. If they put a lot of energy in here, you have to pay for it, and you probably don't want to because a lot of people are never going to take the sword apart. As it is, it's a perfectly fine thing. I would just say the example from Shadow Dancer directly is more refined. The end has been cut off. It's less sharp. It looks less from Longchuan. I make out less file markings that are haphazard or just kind of things that make it fit the tsuba or the ska, the handle, and it generally looks just a little cleaner. The other difference that I note is that the bohi travels a little further into the Nakago on the example from Shadow Dancer than it does from the example from Shadow Dancer sold through Amazon. And then the tip on the example from Amazon is a little thinner, a little probably better. It's probably going to cut a little better, but it doesn't have as much of a belly on the curvature towards the Kasaki area. It's just a slightly different shape, and it's a little bit thinner at the very, very tip. Otherwise, they're fundamentally the same size and shape. Both of them fit the same scabbard. The next difference that I should note is the habaki. So these don't really fit on the same sword. I can kind of put them on, but one clearly, they basically show me that they are made to fit a particular sword or fiddled with in such a way that they fit a particular sword, because I can't put the same habaki on the same sword easily. It's not that I can't maybe force it on, but they don't fit the same way. And also the habaki don't fit the mouth of the koiguchi area the same way. The blades will draw in and out of the scabbard reasonably well. And the one from Shadow Dancer directly will fit in both scabbards, but the one from Amazon has a little bit chunkier habaki, and it doesn't go in the scabbard that was provided from Shadow Dancer. Apart from that, the blades do slide in and out of the scabbard, so they're similar in terms of size, but the habakis don't allow one of them to work on the other. The other bit that I noticed in terms of difference is that the Ito color is slightly different. I don't know if you would get a different Ito color if you bought one from Shadow Dancer today, if you would get this kind of, I don't know, less bold color. This one's a little bit more yellow. This one's a little bit more brown, I guess. It's more beigey, perhaps. Anyway, in terms of look, they have a very similar shape, very similar feel. The Ito tightness is a little better on the example from Shadow Dancer than the example from Amazon, but both are quite sufficient. The Samegawa panels on the example from Shadow Dancer are worse. This has much larger nodules. It's a much nicer skin than the example from Shadow Dancer, which has very, very small nodules. Both of them have ska that are, at this point, cracked. And so it's worth noting that, one, the handle, this one, I have used quite a bit and done some abusive things with. And the example from Amazon, while I was told it has not been used, I had to be a little handsy with it to try to get the broken Mikugi out. So I mentioned that the Mikugi was broken, and I kind of hammered on it quite a bit before I realized that it was just a broken in half Mikugi. That's a dumb on me, but it's very possible that the slight crack in here, which is oddly in the same spot on both swords, is entirely likely that it's from me rather than coming from Shadow Dancer. Apart from that, I do see very small cracks. They're not giant ones. It looks like just around the spine on, well, though they're not quite in the same spot. They're in the same spot on the opposite end. So on the Mune side of the Nakago, there's a slight crack. It doesn't appear to run all the way down the panel. If I try to expand it, it doesn't. But there is a slight crack in the Nakago. One has been abused a lot, and I'm not surprised. The other was abused when I tried to take it apart. So that's worth noting. The other bits are more or less the same. So if I look at the fittings, the tsuba looks basically the same. The patina looks the same. The silver seppa look the same. I don't notice any particular differences between them. The only other thing to note is one that I called out in the Makugi. One was broken. Both of them, incidentally, have Makugi that slide in at a slight slant. Anyway, those are the general differences between the blades and fittings. The other bit to call out is that the example that was sent to me from Shadow Dancer has a horn, koiguchi, kurigata, and kojiri down here at the end, and the example from Amazon has this kind of plastic rim around it. I don't know if this is horn or plastic, and it does have a similar kind of plastic bit at the end. It doesn't look like they're horn parts on here, so there's a slightly different material that's used for the koiguchi, kurigata, and kojiri. I'm not sure about the kurigata, but I believe it's not a horn piece. The horn one looks a little bit more delicate, and this one I believe is made of plastic. It's a little bit thicker. Either scabbard has nice taper to it, though the example from Amazon is a little beefier. The example from Shadow Dancer directly has a little bit better profile to it. And there's also a very slight difference in the color. With that out of the way, I'm going to move on to using the sword. The plan here is to more or less do all the same things, cut some water bottles, pool noodles, see how it holds up. Then I'm going to move on to more abusive things, which are probably going to be logs, ice blocks, things like that I have around. And then eventually I'll bring it to the croquet stake of doom after abusing it. The expectation for this one, incidentally, is to make it to the croquet stake of doom. I'm thinking that's what's going to happen, but there are a couple things to note about this. One, the Hira Zukuri blade is a thinner, smaller sword than a typical one. There's less material here, so it stands to reason it's going to break a little sooner. Two, it's rather cold out. It's above freezing. It's about 45, 50 degrees today, but that still is on the colder side. Blades tend to fail quicker. So being smaller, being cold outside means there's some stuff working against this sword, but I'm expecting it to make it to the croquet stake of doom. I'm not expecting it to last long on the croquet stake of doom, though. Those are my initial impressions. We'll see if I'm right or wrong. Pool noodles were pretty good. Now I'm gonna whack this right on the top, and I'm gonna see if I see any dings, scuffs, pings, or the like. I didn't intend to do that, but I did intend to do a bad hit. I did a particularly bad one, though. Right on the corner here. In the right light, I don't think without a macro lens, I don't have the ability to show this to you. I do see some very, very minor, what looks like the edge has been zhuzhed over slightly, but hit the stand too. So all I'm doing there is just seeing how it cuts. That bottle gave me a bit of trouble. I don't see any damage on the blade. This is bad at wiping up water, but hopefully it's useful for cutting. The static cut, it's really easy to index. I like the shape, and I was able to successfully cut through the bottle without generating a lot of force. I'm gonna try to cut through a fair amount of cloth layers now. I don't know how many layers that is, but it cut through the cloth quite well. Just with my wrist. Not enough. Ooh. Bad cut. Took it with me. Now I'm going to imagine I just did a really bad cut. And I slapped it. Still totally straight. And the tip is on the fragile side, so I'm going to try and just cut with the end of the tip. It's doing some pretty solid cutting with just the tip. good enough. At this point, I'm going to move on to the abusive side of things. I have already cut some non-abusive kind of targets. It's very sharp, and the only problem that I have is the very slightest little bit of edge roll, not quite edge roll. It looks like the edge has just been pushed over slightly, and I can only make it out in the right light. I don't have a macro lens right now. I don't think I would pick it up in the light that I have, which is rapidly diminishing. So I'm going to move on to some more abusive stuff. At this point, the only thing I've gotten was a direct strike down into a water bottle, wherein I got a little bit of edge zhuzhification. It's not perfect anymore. It's not ideal, but this is a very fine edge, so I'm not terribly surprised that it had that effect on a thick rim of a water bottle. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take some ice blocks, hit those, and then I'm going to move on to some logs, and then I'm going to yeet it at a tree, see how it holds up. Then I'm going to break out the old croquet stake of doom. It's been slumbering most of the winter, so we'll see how it holds up. But first, some ice blocks. First a helmet, then some ice blocks. Right. Also, make sure the camera is recording, because otherwise that would be a giant bummer. It is, thank goodness. I just stuck the tip right into the asphalt. And the tip is actually in okay shape. That's what I expected there. I don't know if glinting is the right word, but there's ever so slightly some edge roll. This is, I don't know, like a quarter of a millimeter into the edge. It's very fine. I am noticing some blemishes on the edge, though. It's losing its kind of razor sharpness. It's still at a point where I, even with my limited capability, could probably fix it. Okay, so far holding up quite well. Not perfect, but for a very fine edge, not surprised. Now I'm gonna try to bend it. The idea is I'm gonna slap it on the side of the stand like this. If there were a sword coming and I batted it out of the way and led in for an attack, it's not dissimilar from some of the batting attacks, but more abusive, certainly. Oh, okay, that first one I got a pretty good size and noticeable bend here, so it doesn't spring back into shape. Bends back. Okay, that was a pretty hard swing. I'll try a lighter one. That was okay. Okay. Starting to see a little bending. Back to straight. I'm going to swing really hard now, just to right here. So, okay, we've got some pretty significant bending at the tang and some up here. This is somewhat surprising for a through hardened blade. Let me see if I can bend it back. We are back. Reversed it. The tang is straight too, but it was kind of bending off at the tang as well. But now I am straight again. Okay. I'm gonna chop hard now. I think I see a slight bend, probably from bad angles. Let's see if I can... Back to straight. All right, sword friends, there's some things here that make this not a super steel sword, but still a good sword. And the edge deflection or edge roll that I'm seeing from cutting into the logs is not ideal, but not terribly surprising for what I'm doing. It's a very thin, very light blade with a kind of a razor edge with not a lot of meat behind it. It's not a surprise that it's bending. I've seen more robust blades bend on some of these targets more than I am this. So for that, I'm not too displeased. It would have been great if it held up exceptionally well, but I can't say I'm surprised or terribly disappointed that it didn't on the plastic bottles. It held up to ice really well, though. It held up to some of that stuff. I'm seeing more in this wood here, which it's just kind of gotten above freezing. This is still probably, it's hardwood and quite cold, and so it's not a surprise that it also is causing some damage. The part I'm least satisfied with, though, is the bending. S5 is supposed to be a little bit more shock resistant, and I was used to it kind of springing back into shape a bit more than it is. What I'm seeing here is that it takes a bend much better than a differentially hardened blade would, but much worse than a lot of other spring steel blades typically do. So if I'm batting things out of the way, it's forgiving as much as you need to be for a practitioner, but not zombie apocalypse forgiving, right? And it seems to be bending more the more aggressive, dumb things I do with it. So that is a bit of a downer. What this means, though, is that if at this point, I would be very comfortable saying if you are intending to cut tatami mats in a dojo, this is still a very fine blade to do that. It's light and lively. It takes on a lot of the targets exceptionally well. But once I'm moving up to some hard targets, it's just not the right tool for the job. But that doesn't matter. This is here to break. So I'm going to move on with the next phase, which is the tree yeet. The fitting, we're a little bit bent. Good enough. Missed. One. Hit on the kasha, a little bit of damage here. Not sure how salvageable that is. Oh, I lost the kasha. Fugi down. There. All right, did I not hit the record button? God damn it. So I'm able to get the tip to bend, but I have to penetrate pretty deep and twist pretty aggressively, and then I can get the very end of the tip to bend. It certainly doesn't bend back easily. Twist it back the other way. Not really coming out. Okay, so. And the Mikugi has largely failed. So I got to replace that before I move on to the next fun stages. Ugh. All right, sword friends, fewer licks to get to the center of the Tootsie Pop than expected. That broke on 3 or 4 whacks, which wasn't a particularly hard strikes either. Grain structure looks reasonably fine. Might be the weather, might be because it's a finer blade, but either way, that's what it takes to break one of these son of bitches. All right, sword friends, I've had a moment to collect my thoughts, and I have some things to impart on you before you go. One, in terms of performance and how things held up, the kasha is worth noting. It's also worth noting no matter how many times you make YouTube videos, sometimes you forget to hit the record button on your camera. So it would have been nice if I had that footage. Incidentally, I've lost the kasha. It flung off somewhere, and I could at least see which direction it went if I hit the record button. Anyway, that's not great, but what is great is that after losing it, I still use this sword. I threw it at a tree a few more times, I cut with it a few more times, and you can see that the knots are still tight. This ito is still on there. it wouldn't be surprising if this came undone, and it didn't. And that is a tip of my hat to Shadow Dancer. Another odd bit was that the Mikugi broke effectively twice. Now, one before it came to me, or at least when it came to me, I thought, as I noticed, there was some gap here, and I mentioned that in the beginning of the video. But later, after bending it, after throwing it at a tree several times, the Mikugi broke again, and I replaced it just before doing the Croquet Stake of Doom. The Mikugi is placed off at an angle. Some people don't like that, as in it goes in kind of this way. That tends to push things up. I like that Shadow Dancer puts the Mikugi in at an angle, but it might make it more of a guillotine. I'm not sure. I think it has more to do with the bending than anything else. But Mikugi can go in straight, they can go in on an angle. I give a thumbs up to Shadow Dancer for doing it at a bit of an angle. The blade performance is the next one to talk about, and the blade held up well if all you're doing is soft and medium cutting. It performed well in the sense that it cut through water bottles pretty well. I don't often get the base of the bottle standing on the stand after I cut. I'm cutting on uneven stuff, and I'm not a great cutter in general when I'm concentrating, but trying to remember if I turn the camera on or not is a little bit of a distraction. So I seldom get those cuts. I got a few of them. This cuts exceptionally well. It has a great shape. It's very sharp. It's very light. I could practice with it all day in class. It is an easy blade to recommend if those are your uses. And it's as forgiving as it needs to be for those activities. But what it didn't do is perform in my head like S5 shock steel should do. And this seems to be a common thing. The most durable swords that I've tested at this point in my YouTube career have been 1, the Cloudhammer S7 Katana, and 2, the Shadow Dancer S7 Katana. And S5 is supposed to be like a successor to S7, making it even more durable. So the fact that it loses its edge isn't necessarily it's not ideal, but breaking on the croquet stake when it did, bending as much as it did, those are things that I'm not expecting S5 shock steel to do, and that's fundamentally the way this one performs. So when I cut into the plastic water bottle, a really fine, thin, razor-sharp sword that isn't known for being particularly high edge retention, it's not great, but I'm not really bummed out. And also the damage was really, really superficial. With a honing stone or just a little bit of work, I could have gotten those things out, even with my really mediocre ability at sharpening. What I can't really excuse, though, is how much it bent. So a hard swack on the side of a log, and the blade took a set immediately. I was kind of expecting S5 shock steel to hold its shape quite a bit better. And this one bent less than a differentially hardened blade does, but it certainly bent a lot more than much less expensive through hardened blades, even others in the Shadow Dancer selection and assortment. The 9260 blade didn't bend that much. The 51 CRV4 blade didn't bend that much. Any other through hardened blade from Shadow Dancer hasn't bent as much as this one has. So that seems a bit of an oddity to me. Now, I'll mention as well that the heat treatment doesn't look bad. The grain structure in my non-metallurgical brain looks reasonably good. It doesn't seem like it's poorly done. Just, I know there's a lot of different ways to heat treat S5. I think there's one that's more resilient in terms of taking the kind of abuse that is related to a metal pole or being slapped on a tree. I would recommend that Shadow Dancer use a different heat treatment. The other bits is how much damage it took. So as I mentioned, when it hit into the edge of plastic water bottles, when I hit it into logs, it took really kind of superficial damage. Whacking into the Croquet Stake of Doom, I see more or less about like 1.5 millimeters of damage behind the edge. It penetrated or hurt it more than it typically does. That is more or less because this Hira Zukuri blade has a very fine, not a lot of meat, not a lot of niku on the blade, so it's more or less taking more damage cutting into things. I was also a bit surprised that this very thin tip didn't break. I stuck this into asphalt and it was okay, and then I bent it on a tree and it's turned into a bit of a fishhook at the end, but at the same time it actually held up reasonably well. I'd like it if it didn't bend, but bending is, I guess, better than breaking, and for what it is, it seemed actually relatively resilient. So that much was nice because that was a very thin part of the sword, so I was actually kind of surprised that it didn't shatter or break. It bent over, which is better. Holding its shape would be perfect, but if I had to choose between snapping off and bending, I would choose bending. Anyway, I think the sword at the end is still a really great tool if you are a practitioner looking for a sword that is light, lively to cut tatami mats. If you struggle to build momentum up and you want a light practice tool, it's an excellent light practice tool. The examples from Shadow Dancer draw and sheath really well. Both of them did that. They both had tight ito. I would prefer, incidentally, the example from Shadow Dancer directly. The Nakago was a little prettier. The ito's a little tighter. But the example from Amazon had you know, still very tight ito. The polish was a little better. The Samegawa had larger panels on it. That was nice. The fittings are about the same. The saya was a little bit more robust on the one from Amazon, but the tight ito I'm kind of a sucker for. So that's the main reason I would choose this one. If you order from Shadow Dancer, you have the option of choosing Hishigami Pro, which is, I'm guessing, what this one had, and I'm not sure. This one has Hishigami, but maybe not the Pro level. And as a result, the ito is just tighter on here. That's more meaningful to me. That's why I would choose that one. Sword friends, at the beginning of the video I mentioned I was going to send this sword off for metallurgical analysis, and I've done that. I sent it to APL Labs in Wisconsin. They took the tip that I sent them, cut off a piece, standardized it so they could put it in their machinery, did a hardness testing, which came back at a hardness level that I would say is appropriate for a through hardened blade made of S5. Unfortunately, the chemical analysis showed that it is not S5 and came back as meeting the standard for 1070. Now, I find this to be really surprising, and I'm disappointed. At the same time, there's some other stuff I should cover here. One, I sent in another manufacturer's goods. They also came back as not necessarily what was advertised, in a different way, but still problematic. So the issue of selling swords that are not made of what they are advertised as is not unique to Shadow Dancer, at least. At the same time, Shadow Dancer really hasn't had enough time to evaluate the problem, right? I didn't notify them. They said they take it very seriously. They mentioned they could have gotten the wrong steel from their supplier, or they mentioned they could have picked up the wrong steel and manufactured the sword out of it. Anyway, they take it seriously. They'd like me to send a chunk of the sword back to them so that they can independently verify and try to figure out what's going on. I'd love to give you the idea or some clearer picture of how problematic this is. Now, one random sampling doesn't mean that every sword is not manufactured of the steel advertised, but it is, unfortunately, a breach of trust, certainly. One sword went out not made of the thing that was advertised, and I think a fair example. This was sold to a private sword citizen off of Amazon. It was advertised as S5, and it is not S5. That in and of itself is problematic. Regardless of how the issue came to be, it is problematic. So the other thing I've had time to reflect on is that the grain structure is a little coarser. I initially mentioned that I thought it was tight, and looking at it a little bit more closely with a camera that can actually get very close to it, it looks a little coarser. It stands to reason that if they did pick up the wrong steel, they would heat treat it the wrong way, and the grain structure might be coarse as a result. I want to say I've tested an S7 katana from Shadow Dancer. It held up really well, had a tighter grain structure, but unfortunately I don't have those pieces around anymore to compare and contrast. I'm also kind of reluctant to figure out how I could confirm or reject trust, right? If Shadow Dancer sent me a bunch more swords to test and I broke them and then sent them off for metallurgical analysis, I think the skeptics among you would say, well, hey, they probably cherry-picked those examples. And likewise, I can't go buy a bunch of Shadow Dancer swords under fake names because it's a very expensive thing that I can't justify doing. So I'm not sure how to give a clear picture of how problematic this is or how systemic it is, but I can say in this particular case, this one sword, it was sent off, tested, and it came back, unfortunately, as not S5 and as 1070 instead. So I suppose with that information, it's time I answer the question, do I personally think it's worth it or not? Now I'm of two minds on this sword, friends. On one hand, this is a great sword. It moves well, it feels good in the hand, it cuts well, I can do iaido with it for hours. It's an excellent sword. If you wanted a light, lively sword that did those things, you like the Hira Zukuri profile, this would be an easy one to recommend. Unfortunately, it's not made of the material that was advertised, and it's accountable to do that. On principle, I simply have to say no, at least for this one example. This is not made of the material advertised, and I don't actually care what steel it's made from. I don't care if it's S5 or not. If it does sword things good, I'm happy. But I do need the sword to be exactly what it says it is. And if it's made of some other random material that isn't what is advertised, when that advertising, that S5 is a real draw. It brings a lot of people in. People are looking for that bougie, swanky steel. Some of the sword snobs out there, steel snobs out there will want exactly that S5 steel. They don't care. They care a lot that it's made of something else. And so on principle, I have to say no on this one. Now, does that mean I don't trust Shadow Dancer in general? Well, I will say that it puts a little bit of skepticism in my mind. At the same time, I don't have any reason to believe that they are defrauding everyone all the time. I have no evidence for it, and I have no reason to believe it because there's a lot of attention to detail here. All of this attention would lead me to believe that they are meticulous in the things that they do. And so I'm hoping that this is kind of a fluke and not a common thing. Unfortunately, is it common or not is going to have to be a question that I answer on a future date, something that Shadow Dancer contributes to, and I will make content when I have a better answer for you. At the moment, though, I would say no, just on that principle, but do know it's a great sword. So if you're not bothered by those factors, well, it still is what it is, and that was a very fun, lively, and good sword to move around. Anyway, sword friends, that's all I've got. I hope the video is interesting. Cheers, and thanks for watching.